a new DLC, a balance of power update, and some polish for Assetto Corsa Competizione. How did it drive? Find out right here, right now. Greetings Rommies and welcome to Vrom, the channel sharing the joy of sim racing into our review of the GT2 Pack DLC, the newest content to come to ACC. My name is Ike and I will be your host for this video. It's a good question why Kunos is working on two projects at once, and maybe they need the money from this DLC to get where they need to be with AC2. Or they are under contractual obligation with the SRO, because they clearly said that ACC was done and dusted. But now they're bringing this DLC, and later in the year, Nürburgring Nordschleife. Maybe Sugar Daddy 505 Games needs the money urgently, and they've turned to the only product that's earning its keep to cover its other projects. We just don't know. As we said in the news, Kunos have released their 1.9.6 update at the same time as they released the DLC, including the Red Bull Ring coming to Assetto Corsa Competizione. The good news to start with is that there are a number of fixes to the GT3 class cars, along with this update, with the 2018 Bentley and GTR, 2016 Lexus, amongst a couple of other cars including the 992 Porsche GT3. More about the GT3s later in the video. Back to the main part of the update. The really good news is that all of the new GT2 cars at least drive somewhat comprehensively. The Mercedes feels closer to a tank than a car and has enough straight line speed to scare a prototype. The Maserati is as only a Maserati can be, and that is the unequivocal darling in the handling department, with the looks and power to match. The Audi is an Audi. The GT3 handling has transferred beautifully over to the new class. If you enjoyed the R8 before, you'll love this one. The KTM, the only one I didn't drive but witnessed, has apex speeds that might actually rival GT3 cars and stands alone in that achievement. The aerodynamic grip coming from the Mercedes is like driving a different class. You'll notice I left a couple of cars out from that roundup. The Porsche duo are an exception to that praise so far. At best, they could be considered lackluster, and at worst, you'd have to wonder what Porsche did to Kunos for them to give such a terrible impression in game. The suspension travel is far too long. The gearbox has ratios we're pretty sure are straight out of the Nissan GTR, the very worst part of that car too. And there's no power curve. It's just flat. There's no power compared to its competitors. While the linear power delivery is appreciated with the rare engine layout of the 991-2 chassis, there's just not enough of it to be competitive. And the 935, although clearly based on the same car, seems even heavier and more dull as a result of that. And that leads us on to the absolute letdown of this DLC. The BoP of the GT2s. While the Maserati and Mercedes have compelling reasons to drive, in the case of the Mercedes a clear 30 horsepower of reasons, the Audi is at best situational, and the other three cars are pretty much nowhere. Kunos has been at this now since 2018, releasing realistic balance of power figures that absolutely aren't representative of the in-game performance. I personally will say, if realism is getting in the way of good, varied, competitive racing, then realism is not required. We were having engaging, fun, competitive racing in sims far before we ever had official performance figures for any cars, let alone the amount of direct access Kunos now has within SRO. We may have a different philosophy than Kunos, but we prefer the joy of sim racing. Rant hat taken off, and again, we'll have some positivity. As we said at the outset, there was a secret balance of power change in the GT3 class too, bringing cars as far back as the Lexus RCF GT3 potentially back into competition. And as the once king of wet and endurance races, the half a ton relieved from the ballast over the different tracks may see drivers new to ACC looking back instead of forwards for their next car. Another fix applied to the Lexus we weren't expecting is a collision box being raised. an issue known to plague the cars in ACC for a long time now. This, along with the Nissan GTR and Bentley Continental GT3, represent the first look at previously released cars in BoP that we have ever seen from Kunos officially. We hope that this is just a small first step and will be expanded across all of the content that is essentially useless in ACC, with a new generation of GT3 cars bordering on GTE aerodynamic performance. Other BoP highlights are the Ferrari 296, Lamborghini Huracan Evo 2 and the McLaren 720S Evo being reined in with sweeping power reductions across most, if not all, tracks. The Aston Martin V8 Vantage has been given a new yaw profile and, from early testing, may no longer be the beginner-friendly couch of a GT3 car that it has been up until this point. The GT4 class has also been looked over, with heavy power restrictions to the Alpine A110 GT4 and minor fixes across the board which have been needed since the GT4 pack was released in 2021. Only took them 2 years. Lastly, in this patch there have been some changes to grass and gravel and sand friction, something you wouldn't have noticed unless you're exploring where you shouldn't. And some minor graphical changes around the wheels and tyres, notably one of the worst graphical parts of ACC until now. We'll see if this fixes these issues. All in all, this DLC and the update are a mixed bag. The Red Bull Ring is nice enough, but not the track we would prefer to see. The GT2s are for the most part nice to drive, but if you love your Porsches, then maybe not. And the BoP of the GT3s and GT4s is okay, but somehow we wish Kunos would make up their mind about the cars. Seems every update brings yet another BoP. Seems to be Kunos' kink.